What's up, world history class? DJ Mustache coming at you with another U.S. history lesson. We're going to pick up pretty much where we left off last week. I hope everybody had a good weekend and that you're staying safe. Be nice to your siblings. Be good to your parents. I'm going to try to X myself out of this because I'm tired of looking at myself. So let's pause this. And we're back. All right. So let's kind of pick up where we left off just about. And some of this will be review, but that's okay. We are talking about the end of World War I, and we'll wrap that up today and maybe a little bit tomorrow. And then the rest of the week, we're going to be talking about the Roaring Twenties, which is, it was a rip-roaring good time, hence the name. So let's get going without further ado. And you're going to have an assignment that goes along with this. It's going to be called Week 2, Day 1 Summary Questions. You guys are doing a good job so far. Almost everybody is turning in their work. So just keep that up. All right. The world was transformed by World War I. 22 million soldiers and civilians died. 20 million more were wounded, and 10 million were refugees. So just talking about being directly physically impacted, that's over 50 million people. If you look at the statistics, battlefield deaths, the United States comes in at a much smaller number than the other major combatants or major countries involved in the war. You can see that the Allied powers took more losses than the Central Powers, almost twice as many. Why do you think the United States had less deaths than the other countries? Well, two main reasons. A, we joined the war after it had already been going on. And B, the war wasn't taking place on our home turf. So for both of those reasons, the death toll in the U.S., well, it was still big. It was 116,000. That's not a small number when you compare it to Germany, which lost 1.8 million, Russia 1.7, and so on. These are just some photos of dead soldiers from World War I. If we were in school together, I'd have us watch this video. Someone went back in and colorized a bunch of World War I photos. It's really, really cool. This guy, we saw him on a previous slide. He's a victim of poison gas. So you can see these folks are all amputees. That has not stopped them from looking very dapper. This we looked at last time. All right. We talked about that last week, so let's get going with new stuff. Well, to recap one last time, we didn't wind up joining the League of Nations. It was our brainchild. Woodrow Wilson thought of it, but he couldn't get necessary support. The League of Nations is going to be made up of a General Assembly, 27 nations. And I apologize if we already talked about this. One thing that the Treaty of Versailles, which is the treaty that ended World War I, one thing that it does is it sets the stage for World War II. And it does that in a number of ways. First of all, you can see that pretty much all of Western Europe and Western Central Europe and the Middle East were redivided. Get new nations in Russia that will, of course, be consolidated by Lenin. Wilson couldn't get the support needed. Like I said, he needed a 2/3 vote in the Senate, which is very hard to get. A lot of senators didn't like the Treaty of Versailles. They didn't want to join the League of Nations. There was still an isolationist mindset in the eyes of a lot of people. They sort of thought, well, we just got involved in global politics and we lost over 100,000 people. So there was strong sentiment against foreign entanglements, as our buddy George Washington called them. So these senators, known as strong reservationists, they're going to demand changes to the League Covenant, or basically the rules of the League of Nations. Article 10 of the League Covenant. The members of the League undertake to respect and preserve as against aggression the territorial integrity and existing political independence of all members of the League in case any such aggression or in case of any threat or danger of such aggression, the Council shall advise upon the means by which the obligation shall be fulfilled. Other senators, known as the irreconcilables, wanted the U.S. to completely return to isolationism. They refused to sign the Treaty of Versailles or commit to the League of Nations. To reconcile means to bring back together, right? They've been separated, and then once they're reconciled, they've been reunited. So the name sort of says it all, really. They're going to attack the Treaty of Versailles. Wilson goes on a national tour. He sets out on a tour because he's trying to drum up enthusiasm for the Treaty of Versailles. Remember, we had been involved in foreign skirmishes, and we had assisted other countries in foreign battles, but this is something altogether new. So Wilson has a real task on his hands in terms of how do you present this to the people in such a way that they'll get behind you. This guy, Warren G., he runs for president in 1920. And Warren G. Harding, one thing that he's known for is this slogan, a return to normalcy. Harding runs based on this promise that he will return America to its pre-World War I shape. Another major point in his campaigning was that he didn't want to join the League of Nations. So that made him popular to a lot of Americans. He wins. And you can see down here the South, with the exception of Tennessee, up in the upper South. All of the South, the deep South over to Texas, voted Democrat, whereas the entire rest of the country voted for Harding, voted for the Republican candidate. So these are your member nations when it's all said and done. Most of South America, all of Canada, most of Africa, Western Europe, Australia. I mean, it is an international group, but we just didn't want to be involved at that point. So what are some of the immediate and long-term effects? Well, immediate effects, an entire generation basically of Europeans is either killed or wounded. We see the fall of dynasties in Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia. We get the formation of new countries, the League of Nations, although it doesn't last forever, it's established to help promote peace. Long term, a lot of nations are going to come out of this feeling bitter. They will feel like the peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, was very unfair to them. That's a big rallying cry of Hitler. And probably most importantly, all the issues that helped cause the war, nationalism, international competition, those things are all still there. The war does have positive effects in terms of treatment of African Americans and women. Now, that is not to say that things were suddenly a-okay, but there will be improvements. Now, this, we're not going to answer the questions here, but as I mentioned, Hitler, who he was a German soldier during World War One, before he's going to become leader of the Nazi Party, and he would repeatedly point to the Treaty of Versailles as being this shining example of how Germany is being mistreated by the world, how they're not getting a fair shake, and he's going to use this treaty and how unfair he thinks it is to drum up enthusiasm when he's building up the Nazi Party. So, a little bit of a teaser. Hitler says, "When the armistice begins, the humiliation with the armistice begins the humiliation of Germany. If the Republic, on the day of its foundation, had appealed to the country, Germans, stand together, up and resist the foe, the fatherland. The Republic expects of you that you fight to your last breath. Then millions who are now enemies of the Republic would be fanatical Republicans. Today, they're the foes of the Republic, not because it is a republic, but because the Republic was founded at the moment when Germany was humiliated, because it was so discredited, the new flag, that men's eyes must turn regretfully towards the old flag," right? He used the word humiliation twice in there. Moving on. So long as this treaty stands, there could be no resurrection of the German people. No social reform of any kind is possible. The treaty was made in order to bring 20 million Germans to their deaths and to ruin the German nation. But those who made the treaty cannot set it aside. As its foundation, our movement formulated three demands. Number one, setting aside the peace treaty. Number two, unification of all Germans. Number three, land and soil to feed our nation. Remember, the boundaries of Germany had been reduced big time. Finally, our movement could formulate these demands. Since it was not our movement which caused the war, it has not made the Republic. It did not sign the peace treaty. There is thus one thing which is the first task of this movement. It desires to make the German once more national, that his fatherland shall stand for him above everything else. It desires to teach our people to understand afresh the truth of the old saying, "He who will not be a hammer must be an anvil." An anvil we are today. And that anvil will be beaten until out of the anvil we fashion once more a hammer, a German sword. Hitler right there, and this is almost 20 years before the United States enters World War II, but he says it right there. That's literally the first thing he lists in his three demands. Set aside the peace treaty. So how did it change America? Well, in a number of ways, in a ton of ways, in fact. We're going to, Standard 16 says investigate how political, economic, and cultural developments after World War I led to a shared national identity. So following World War One, the U.S. begins to form an even stronger national identity. Like the effects of communism's rise led to strong efforts to defend the U.S. from its spread. The regional divide that characterized much of the 19th century kind of starts to give way to a more national approach to politics, economics, and culture. Also, the influence of mass media, which was huge, that led to a nationwide advertising campaigns that are going to target consumers in all parts of the United States, not just one area. Excuse me. So it's out of those conditions, the 1920s goes even further to solidify our national identity. That national identity was basically the U.S. defended democracy and capitalism, and mass consumerism influences culture across the nation. So even though there's a lot of prosperity and unity in the U.S. after World War One, there were also significant identity and equality struggles still challenging women and blacks. So those groups are going to emerge from the 1920s, especially with a greater political and cultural significance or impact, I should say. So we're officially the richest and most developed country in the world at this point. And as I mentioned, mass production. Now, mass production was improved during the war because remember, we had this huge nationwide effort to make wartime supplies. And in doing that and putting forth that effort, we really increased our industrial capacity. We increased our ability to make goods. So not to mention, you now have a new segment of the population that is qualified to work in factories. Women who previously had no experience in it, they have been called to factory jobs during the war. Black people who maybe were working on rural jobs in the South when we saw the Great Migration. They now have experience and ability to work in factories. So just business is booming. That combined with this, the image of, the dancing flapper girl there and the guy in his tuxedo, the rise of speakeasies and all that. That's why we're going to label this the Roaring Twenties. And that's probably a term that you guys have all heard. It's sort of the Great Gatsby era. So Harding, remember his return to normalcy, his promise of that. He says America's present need not heroics, but healing, not nostrums, but normalcy, not revolution, but restoration. What do these images reveal about America in the 1920s? I can't read this up here, guys. I don't know if you can either. So we're going to skip that one. Here we go. Western Hemisphere, Uncle Sam over here. And they're the leading members of the League of Nations to promote world peace. The idea being, as long as we're over here not getting involved, meanwhile, on the other hemisphere, we're getting the seeds of future wars. So this is somewhat prophetic, right? It's saying, it's warning of what does wind up happening. And because of the toll, for all the reasons we've talked about, isolationism once again becomes the calling card of American foreign policy. So here we go. Uncle Sam is getting married, foreign entanglements, somewhat of a homely lady. The priest says, if any man can show just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him speak. And this fellow, a U.S. senator, saying, no way, Jose. The Senate was staunchly opposed to foreign wars, entanglements. Now, were we a truly isolationist nation, or were we isolationist in certain areas and not others? I would say it's the latter, really. We're still involved in global politics. We're just, for the time being, not involved in a full-fledged war. But we host a naval conference trying to boost the military of all nations. And those are nations, of course, who are allies of ours. So again, we're not officially in the League of Nations, but we're still playing a large role in influencing it. We're also making huge loans in the billions of dollars. Because remember, Britain and France were decimated during the war. So here we go, the U.S. loaning money to the Germans, right, to help them rebuild. Germany paying reparations, paying costs for damages they had done to Britain and France. Britain and France using those reparations to repay the U.S. So the U.S. is really the start of this whole cycle of money moving around Europe, moving around the world. We wind up signing another major act called the Kellogg-Briand Act. And the Kellogg-Briand Act, right here, we have it written. We won't read the whole thing, but it was a treaty between the United States and other powers providing for the renunciation of war as an instrument of national policy. Basically, I mean, what is that saying? We renounce war being used as an instrument. That's largely symbolic, but still it represents, if you look down here, Poland, Belgium, France, Japan, Italy, all that, New Zealand. I mean, it still is us getting involved in business with other countries. The chief business of the American people is business. As he's playing a piano tune, on a cash register. All right. I think with that, we'll stop. Good job, like I said last week, getting your stuff done. For those of you who maybe didn't do as great of a job as I'd like you to, I'll be reaching out to you at some point this week. If you have any questions about anything, please let me know. And in the meantime, remember, your assignment today is called Week 2, Day 1 Summary Questions. Those are going to be due Friday at 11:59 p.m. All right, guys, stay safe. Stay well.